Right. Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to 4.2, where we're going to be learning about acquisition profiles, hostile mergers, and shark repellent. So let's break these things down and surmise them before we actually, talk about them in detail. Acquisition profiles, as you may think, are the profiles of a company that's about to be acquired, or at least it's the profile you make as an acquiring company for a company that you want to acquire. So it's essentially those that list of requirements for whatever company you look at as a viable option of purchase. Then we also have hostile mergers. We have friendly mergers, and we have hostile mergers. Remember, mergers usually occur between two companies of similar size. One second. However, when we talk about hostile mergers, it's usually an acquisition, meaning a bigger company forcefully buying a smaller company. And that's where shark repellent comes in. How do we make sure that that doesn't happen, that bigger company does not buy that smaller company forcefully? What's up, you first? The Securities and Exchange Commission is one big part. They make rules, regulations. The SEC's filing database, EDGAR, gives us all of the information, public companies, 10K, 10Q, so on, various financial statements. What's up, Reed? Actually, we're going to get into things with taxes, so that should be interesting.
Was Sprint and T-Mobile hostile or friendly?
I believe that was friendly. Okay, and of course, this is the website. You can find everything on here, various chapters across the world, so on. Okay, attractive acquisition targets. Don't worry about photo, that's fine. Attractive, I was actually, for this photo, I was going to put a picture of David sleeping on the bus that I got from someone. Don't worry, you got it. That's going to be so sick. Can you send me them? I'll give you my number after this. Okay. Attractive acquisition targets. So like I kind of did mention, when a big company is scouting for a smaller company it can merge with, it can actually acquire, well, it's going to make a list of requirements that it wants from that company. So attractive acquisitions have more than one of the reasons that a company merges. So can anyone remember one of the reasons why a company may merge? Reed, can you remember one of the reasons a company might merge? It takes more money to merge with a company than...
To get rid of the competition.
To get rid of the competition, that's one of them. Another one is geographic expansion. Another one is because it takes too long to grow organically, and so on. There are a lot of reasons. But, of course, attractive acquisitions usually have more than one of those reasons. So an example would be an acquiring firm with unused debt capacity, unused tax credits, and that is operating at a low profile, at a low profitability, or a loss. So those are multiple reasons why you may want to merge with that company. So what is debt capacity? Well, more debt can be taken on by target firm XYZ in order to increase the return on equity for shareholders of the acquiring firm. Think about it this way. If you're going to buy a firm, do you want it to have more debt or less debt? Less debt. Why? Because later on when you acquire that firm and you start operating it, you can put more debt on it. You can finance future expenditures, so on. As well, one thing you want is sometimes you want that company to be operating at a loss because that decreases the value of a company. Hence, it makes the shares of that company cheaper to buy. So you have to think about it. Well, I don't want the company to have too much debt, but maybe I've wanted it to pay a lot of taxes, or maybe I want it to be operating at a low profitability. A few mixes of positives and negatives in order to get the ideal price for that company. So tax losses can offset the profitability of the acquiring firm, decreasing the tax to be paid for the combined entity. That's just an important thing to note. And again, I mentioned that ideal portion. You want the lowest price for that acquired company. The acquiring firm may have specific requirements that vary from other acquiring firms. Every firm should have a strategy that they're following whenever they're scouting for a company that they want to acquire. But the important part here is what the investment banks do, because that's where we come in, right? Remember, I talked about it previously in 4.1, but investment banks are responsible for M&A advisory. So they're not financing, they're not giving money to companies in order to buy other companies, or they're not actually buying a company themselves usually. What they're doing is they're advising either the buyer of the company or the seller of the company. And we're going to talk about the killer B team in a second in relation to shark repellent and so on. I know those are some crazy words, but they do exist. But in terms of advisory, something specific that investment banks do is develop that acquisition profile, which Rita's going to talk about in a second.
All right. This is by Kevin Lama. He's not here, but there's 4 ways that you can get information. First is through large databases. So there's public information that everyone can use to get information. Second is industry publications. If a target is not publicly traded, a plethora of information should be available via a search of industry publications, company websites, and news reports. So if it's not so basically you can look at the company's websites, or you can look at what they've published, so you can get information there. The third vector is third-party reports. So these are third parties, so parties that are not associated with a different party that report on the original party. Fourth are patents. So when you patent something, it's your invention, so you get control over that thing. So you can look at that patent to learn about that information. And then fifth is through networking events. So at networking events, like what Ion always does, go to these networking events. You can get information. You can talk with people.
Thank you for the plug. And
Absolutely.
some good networking events are things like road shows too, right? Although they may be a bit more exclusive, you're learning a lot about, the clientele of investment banks and so on. Other good networking events would be annual shareholder meetings, especially for companies that you care about, because usually the shares that you have are either Class A or Class B, and they give you some kind of voting power within the actions of that company.
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
What's the value of your stock portfolio?
The value of my stock portfolio? I can't disclose that, but it's in the thousands right now. All right. I can't disclose that right now.
How many
I
digits?
promise you'd be satisfied.
So this is Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is known mainly for his company Geico for insurance. So he's the chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, which is, I think, the most expensive stock you can buy,
You
right?
mentioned that, right? Let me speak here. So he said that he was the chairman of Geico, or at least Geico was one of his companies, and that's completely correct. What we need to understand, though, is that he's the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway is a conglomerate. What does anyone remember what conglomerates are? What's a conglomerate merger? What's conglomerate integration? What's up? No. Oh no, it's possible. Maybe Whole Foods is a company that has a lot of other companies. So kind of, yeah. But okay, what's a conglomerate merger? That's what I want the definition of. What's up, Shane?
It's just a company that purchases a ton of companies that have no real. There's nothing in common with them. They
Exactly.
purchase them in order to make profit.
Exactly. And why they purchase them for the most part is because they want to increase the diversity of their company and reduce risk thereby. What's up? Facebook, yeah, I believe Facebook has other companies like Oculus, so on, but they're called Meta now.
I don't think it's expanded enough to be a company. So
Maybe, I don't know.
Tech sector, so
They have Instagram, they have Meta. I'm not sure how exactly the nuances of the tech center work. The tech industry works. But yeah, it is something else that they do own. You may be able to call it a subsidiary, but essentially, Berkshire Hathaway is a conglomerate firm. What they do is they buy a bunch of other companies, like Geico. They might own a battery company. I can't remember all of the companies they own. They own Dairy Queen as well. Just a lot of unrelated businesses that have increased their diversity and overall reduced the risk of this company itself. It's probably pretty stagnant overall when you look at its stock charts and so on. But yeah, he owns Berkshire Hathaway, and Berkshire Hathaway owns a lot of other companies due to its conglomerate integration.
Anyways, I want to say Berkshire Hathaway is the most expensive stock, right? It's up there.
Probably.
It's like per share. It's like $50,000, I think, for one share.
Crazy.
So, yeah, because of all of this, he is worth $100 billion because of Berkshire Hathaway, and he's donated the vast majority of his wealth to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which that sounds a little suspicious to me. It's a little suspicious that he's donating his money to Bill Gates.
Okay, this
So yeah, like Reed was talking about, Warren Buffett, very wealthy man, known as one of the most renowned investors, and he makes his acquisition profile public among his shareholders in Berkshire Hathaway through their annual report to their shareholders. And he has a few reasons, not reasons, but things he needs in the candidates that he invests in. So first of all, it needs to be a simple business. Second of all, it needs management already in place. Third, good returns on equity with no to little debt, as they were talking about earlier. Less debt means there's more debt that you can inquire later when you're managing the company. Have consistent earning ability and be big purchases, which for him is starting at 75 million in pre-tax earnings. And a little fun fact is, even with this criteria, many of the companies that want his assistance don't even come within this criteria.
Thank you, Shannon. But yeah, it's kind of those odd things I want you to take note of, right? Like, we did kind of mention it, but ideally, in your acquisition profile, you want the company you're buying to have little debt so that you can add debt on. Debt is not always scary. Remember, we talked about leverage and how it was a double-sided sword. It can be used for great things, but let's say those things aren't really great, then it can hurt you in the long run because of interest and so on. What's up, Reed?
I want to add something. So I was actually very wrong. Berkshire Hathaway is worth $600,000 per share.
No way.
Yeah. So, or that's Berkshire
What's their
Hathaway.
market-
Hey, they've never stock split.
What's their market cap?
868 billion.
So they own a lot of companies. That's important to note, right? It shows the power of a conglomerate and its various subsidiaries. What? I don't know. I guess that question will remain unanswered. Who has this? Okay. So, friendly mergers versus hostile takeovers. What I want you to note right here, or at least let me ask you a question. What's the difference between a merger and an acquisition? We talked about that in 4.1. What's up? Okay, what's up, Reed?
Merger is like an agreement. It's an agreement to come together, and an acquisition is whenever you buy. Or no, wait, you have to buy someone out for an acquisition.
Not entirely. So a merger is usually done. It's okay, you were close, right? A lot of the times acquisitions are the hostile route. So mergers are done between two companies of similar size, whereas an acquisition is usually done by a bigger company to a smaller company. It's not necessary that that acquisition needs to be negative in the sense that it's hostile, but it's just one bigger company, one smaller company. So remember, it's the size we're talking about. So friendly mergers usually refer to that merger, whereas a hostile takeover usually refers to an acquisition that is that negative connotation, that is that takeover. Although, our takeover is always bad or good. This club was kind of created with the hostile takeover, right? Oh yeah, I told you guys I would tell you that story. Okay, it's time to tell you the story. Okay, it's time. So this club was originally the Mustangs of Wall Street. But what happened was there really was no Wall Street and there was no person that was running it. So me, Cullen, a few other of the old IBC officers and so on, we created a super long document that detailed every reason why our club was better than the club that already existed that talked about finance. We presented, they didn't let us. So we presented it, we presented it to Miss Matthews. She didn't agree. She didn't care. So we talked with Mr. Sparks. We talked with Mr. Colquitt. They backed our idea. They loved it. And we took over the president of Mustangs of Wall Street, changed the name, and now the Investment Banking Club and the IBC project exist today.
Wow. I think it's only allowed to
I like the only thing that's interesting.
Yeah, but investment banking is where we are and what we're doing.
What did they
All right.
talk about at the bus?
They didn't talk about anything because they didn't really do anything.
Call it Golden Mustang Seconds.
What's up?
What's really bad That's please don't suggest any names. Wait, so they did have
What if we change the name?
No, they didn't. They just
I mean, you can, but you just have to be careful, right? Because look, if you have reasoning such as, we teach investment banking mainly, but investment banking will allow you to segue into the various careers of finance after your analyst years, like VC, like PE. I mean, you can say within, if you submit your resume to college, you can say, Investment Banking Club, we promoted financial literacy and allowed people to understand the various avenues of high finance. It depends on how you word it, right?
Stop exposing yourself, dude.
But it's okay. I'll help all of you guys with your finance essays because you're officers. Okay? I'll make sure that you guys get into your target schools. Huh? Of course. Of course. So, friendly mergers versus hostile takeovers. Combinations of businesses can either be agreed upon by both parties, or they can be forced upon by one party over the other. While the end result may be two combined businesses, the investment banking processes for them both differ greatly. And hostile takeovers are usually less synergistic than those friendly takeovers. Does anyone remember what synergy means?
when two companies come together, they become more powerful than one.
Exactly. 1 plus 1 equals 3 is the classic example of. Yeah. So each company combined is greater than their individual values. That's synergy in a nutshell. So people who want to, the real reason is because people who want to work together way better than people who are forced to work together.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is private equity a hostile takeover? Or a friendly merger?
That's a good question. I think that in certain situations, maybe they do hostilely take over a company, but you have to realize that when you're doing a leverage buyout for a company and you have your private equity team, well, now going into that company, changing up the direction, changing up the directors and so on, usually they've paid the management a hefty sum or something like that in order to take over that company. But we're going to talk about LBOs in Chapter 5. It'll be really interesting, and we'll link it all to this. So, yeah, friendly mergers versus hostile takeovers. Horse plus donkey equals horse donkey. And then bear plus deer equals bear that eats deer equals bear that has its tummy, has its hunger satiated, right? So it's just, I mean, it's a really great example, right? We use animals all the time in finance. We have bear markets and we have bull markets. Does anyone remember why bear markets are called bear markets and bull markets are called bull markets?
A bear scratches down and a bull goes up.
Exactly. What did you say back there? Okay, no, I thought you actually said the right answer for a second, but Reed said the right answer, so make sure you remember it, right? A bear has his paws go down, whereas a bull thrusts his horns up. Exactly. Okay. Okay. The board of directors versus the management of a company. This is very important. And what I want you to understand is that it's usually the board of directors that has more leverage than the individual or the executive management of a company. Although sometimes I believe the executive management of a company can be found on the board of directors. But the word of the board of directors takes hierarchy, especially in the place of some kind of takeover, of some kind of merger. Management doesn't necessarily need to agree, but the board of directors do. Why do the board of directors matter more than the management of a company? Exactly. That's the exact answer I needed. Because they manage the interest of the shareholders, and the shareholders are all that matter within a company. There we go. Or at least a public company. When you're private, things may differ a little bit. So let's get into the specific portions, though. So the board of directors select the CEO, approve major policies, make big decisions, oversee performance, serve as external advocates, and ensure the company is being managed in the best interest of the shareholders. This is the most important part right here. The management make the operational decisions, policies, keep the board educated and informed via various reports, and then they bring well-documented recommendations and information to the actual board. What's up?
So to be on the board of directors, you just have to own the most shares of that company.
Not the most, just a significant amount.
Yeah, but I think it also, you're elected to the board of directors, and I believe that election takes place or is in charge, or who's in charge of that election for the most part are your shareholders. And during the annual company meetups, they'll usually elect those board of directors. And we're going to talk about that in a second when we get to proxy voting.
But if you have enough, you're automatically on it, right?
Maybe, I'm not entirely sure. I would fact check that.
Oh yeah, what like a percentage of his stock's entirety do you have to be like on there automatically?
I'm not sure. So look, what you have to understand is every company has its own bylaws. Bylaws essentially are the rules and regulation of a company. Sometimes companies can change their bylaws so that you can only be maybe a board of director if you're voted in, so on. So I don't think that there's some general rule that satisfies all companies. You have to look at each company's individual bylaws.
What if I own like 51%?
If you own 51%, then you might own the company. But that's where things get a bit tricky, because if we look at our various shark repellents, there are certain things that allow companies to maybe sometimes temporarily change their bylaws so that a hostile takeover can't take place. A hostile takeover by owning 51% of the shares. They might temporarily change it so that in order to own the company, you need 70% of the shares. And we're going to talk about that in a second, but that's a very good question.
I have a question. Who determines what percent you have to earn?
Likely the board of directors.
But isn't that like circular?
I know what you're... Yeah, I mean... I see what you're saying. It might be circular to some degree because it's those people that, also have the shares and so on. That I'm not entirely sure whether it's a general rule. Yeah. But ideally, what you want to do is probably, yeah, whatever the shareholders want is kind of the best answer.
Raise the rent prices.
circular, like goes back on itself.
Yeah, because it's just ironic and it's somewhat of a conflict of interest because if your board of directors are dictating that level, right? Let's say someone does a proxy vote or something that allows them to gain the majority of shares within a company and replace the board of directors. Well, that might be kind of weird because you as a board of director just set the limit to how many shares a person can have before they actually own the company. So it's just like, okay, so what limit are you setting? And well, if you set this limit, are you kind of double crossing yourself if someone buys over that limit and removes you who set that limit? It's like really weird. But I believe it's the shareholders that will at least vote on that policy. And regardless, you want to set it at a pretty high amount, 51% and over, right? Oh, okay. So what is a friendly merger? It's a combination of two businesses that's approved by the acquired firm's board of directors. So remember, board of directors takes priority because they are responsible for the interests of the shareholders. Hostile takeovers are a combination of two businesses that are opposed by both the management and the board of directors of a company. Note that the management of the companies will many times be against acquisitions because they might lose their jobs. But we're going to talk about golden parachutes in a second. That's a kind of shark repellent that ensures management get some kind of compensation in the case something like this happens and may have job security. Yeah, what's up?
How could the board of directors not support it if they probably own the majority of the shares?
Not support like what exactly?
The hostile takeover act, like,
They don't
wouldn't they
get
have
to
to sell
decide
their
whether they can
shares
take it
to
or
allow
not.
it to happen?
That's where like tender offers come into play, and I'm not entirely sure if it's usually the board of directors that have a majority share. It could also just be a general voter that has a very large stake within the company that's making these decisions because of a tender offer. We're going to get to tender offers in a second, but yeah, there are various conflicts of interest that may arise. Well, although I don't think that it's always the board of directors that have the most stock within a company. I would fact check that. Due to the deal being opposed by the board of directors, the acquiring company must find a way to obtain the company. So note that it's that board of directors that's underlined, not the management. Board of directors, key. So what are tender offers? So that might answer your question. So when you put out a tender offer, or at least a tender offer is when an acquiring company puts out a public offer to buy the shares of a company at a higher price than they usually are listed for on the market. And that might be kind of incentivizing, right? If you're not a major shareholder within a company, but you own like 100 shares, each one's priced like at $20, $50, and you're getting like $30 per share, well, you don't really care about the voting of the company and you just want quick money, you want quick liquid, then you might just sell out, right? Disclaimer, this offer will only work if 51% of current shareholders agree to sell their shares at that price, though. Again, the majority of the shareholders do need to agree, but if you're a small amount within that majority, you may feel really compelled to do so. When enough shareholders agree to tender or sell their shares, control of the company can be taken by the acquiring firm. And the most important part here, the key part here is, when you have a share, you can vote within a company's actions. But one thing you can vote on, like we talked about previously, is who's going to be on the board of directors. And remember, the board of directors manage kind of all things, really. So if you are the acquiring company and you take majority control within that company, you can change up the makeup of the board of directors and really do whatever you want. Vote to be acquired by that hostile company. What's up?
What if like 90% wants to sell and 10% doesn't? Do they just force the 10% to also sell?
So that's interesting because that's where we get to two-tiered tender offers, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to delay your gratification right now, but there are certain things like that are not allowed to happen. So let's say you do a tender offer and some percent of shareholders don't want to sell. Sometimes what companies will try and do is say, if you don't sell now, we're going to buy it from you. Later on, we're going to give you another offer to buy, but we're going to do it at a significantly reduced price. So this is your only chance to go liquid. So it's kind of like forcing them, blackmailing them. And that's actually not allowed. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Note, the market reaction to tender offers is typically a price increase of the target company. And what ensues then is bid wars. So yeah, you're going to have a ton of companies bidding on one company. And in fact, when Getco outbidded Virtue Financial for Knight Capital Group during this tender offer period had each individual share or in total their company's value rise by 20%. So yeah, it can significantly inflate the value of your stock. And that can be great if you're an individual small shareholder that's just looking for a position to sell and get some quick money. Now let's talk about proxy fights. So this is where voting comes into play. So when a proxy vote, shareholders give their vote to someone that is authorized to vote for them on a manner is given to gain control of the target organization and change the board of directors. So what you kind of need to understand here, I believe, is I realize I've been standing too close to the camera. So most votes for a company will usually take place at the annual company's meeting. Let's say you don't go to the annual company's meeting, but you still own a lot of voting shares for that company. What you can do is you can allow someone at that annual company's meeting to sign like a proxy agreement and take control of your shares for the vote. What a lot of people may do is they might go to certain individuals and tell them, hey, stay home, give me control of your shares temporarily, and I'm going to vote on the behalf of you for whatever I want. For whoever maybe I want on the board of directors that may approve this hostile merger that's going on. So there might be some money slid under the table so that you can get control of someone else's shares at that annual board holder meeting. So that's pretty interesting, but it creates that proxy authority. And that's an example right there. Now we're going to talk about shark repellent. So sharks eat fish, and sharks are traditionally looked at as the predators of the sea.
IBC game. You didn't know.
So. Oh wait, did you get your?
You can help me with the last one.
Oh, my bad. So shark repellent is basically companies trying to get away the sharks or the like big investors trying to do a hostile takeover onto them. So firms can work with investment bankers to make themselves less attractive to other firms looking to take them over. Killer Bees is a team of individuals that work together to ward off takeover bids. So this could be lawyers, accountants, investment bankers, and tax specialists. Shark repellent, or actions that discourage unwanted takeovers. Some mechanisms are put in place before and after hostile takeovers for defense against these big sharks.
Okay, good job. And what I want you to understand is the duality of our investment bankers, right? Sometimes they're going to be on the side of the target company that doesn't want to get acquired, and sometimes they may be on the side of the company that's literally acquiring another company hostily, right? So wherever the money goes, they go. Of course, I'm more so interested in investment banking, not to stay in it forever, but to get those analyst years and then to get into PE or to get into VC, a place that's a bit more profitable. And that's what I want you guys to realize and understand. Go to IB for those analyst years. At least that's the advice I've gotten from a lot of investment bankers. You're going to become an MD? All right. Okay, so now let's talk about our various shark repellents. How do we repel a company from hostilely taking over another company? Well, the first one is poison pills, which allows current shareholders to buy more shares of a company at a discounted price. And what that'll do is that'll dilute the share value of the current shark that's trying to acquire that company, take that 51% or whatever. It can basically frustrate them. Poison puts allow current bondholders to sell their bonds back to the company that, they got it from, and that's going to increase the price of that company to be acquired by that, hostile shark or whatever you may want to call them. Golden parachutes are compensation packages that ensure, or at least that incentivize management to stay with the company that's being hostilely taken over. And that's kind of important, right? Do any of you guys remember when HSBC, or it might be HBC, acquired Credit Suisse? You guys remember that, right? Well, I knew some people that worked at Credit Suisse, and they literally left Credit Suisse, and they were in somewhat executive positions, right? And they joined different banks, so on. So I don't want to name what bank. But
Did they get their golden parachute?
I don't think they did, and that's probably why they left, right? So, but let's say it was an MD, like someone that was super high up that left. Maybe they would be offered a golden parachute so that something like that doesn't happen. But so on, right? These are important, especially if you have valuable players on your team that you don't want to leave. A staggered board of directors. Instead of having a target company have their entire board of directors at the usual annual company meeting, they might have some elected for longer terms so they don't have to go to that meeting because, that's where most board of directors are elected for their next terms. So on, they might switch up the terms. They just might make it really, in essence, make it really difficult for some kind of hostile company to issue like a proxy vote to gain control of the board of directors by placing their own people. So, yeah. And remember, board of directors control kind of everything for a company because they are responsible for the shareholders. Supermajority voting. So this is kind of where we get to your questions, right? Well, what is the percentage needed in order to acquire a company and so on? Well, usually it's 51%, but that can change if you temporarily change the bylaws of your company, which are kind of just, the corporate rules of your company. Let's say you change it so that you need 70% of that company in order to gain and establish control of the company. Well, things like that may happen. What's up? That's what I would think too. I'm not entirely sure. I'd like to do more research on supermajority voting because ideally, I just make it 80% straight off the bat, right? But I'm sure there are some ramifications I don't currently see that may come with that. It might also be that mostly insiders need to hold that majority amount, and now you can only release a very small percentage of your share to outsiders, meaning that you get less capital. Because remember, why do companies IPO? They IPO, exactly, and it's usually one of those last stages they go to for money, because you're releasing large stakes of equity to the public. And also what may happen is if you have a super high percentage that you need in order to actually have full control of the company, you may keep doing secondary offers in order to release more equity of your company. That's probably a painful and costly process because you have to keep hiring investment bankers and so on. So I could kind of see why you wouldn't want it to be too high, but I'm sure there are other things I'm not looking at. But yeah, that's a really good question. So acquiring debt. Now remember, debt is key, right? Usually you want companies to have large debt capacities, meaning don't take many loans so that when I acquire you, we can take lots of loans and we can fund my ideas, which will make us more profitable. Well, let's say that company that's about to be acquired takes on a ton of loans. Well, now it doesn't have much debt capacity, and that's one of those key things in an acquisition profile you want to look for. Fair price amendment. Bylaws of certain target firms may say that acquirers need to pay a fair price. For the company, if seeking it. This is usually defined as purchasing the stock of the company at the highest price at which it traded. And David, this is where two-tiered tender offers come in. So why not just not pay that? How do we convince that 10% in total, right? When 90% agrees, how do we convince that 10% to switch over and sell their shares to that shark for that higher price? That's where two-tier tender offers come into play. So someone thought like you did, and they were like, okay, to that 10%, you know what? If you don't sell to me now, then I'm going to make sure that your share price reduces in value, and then you're going to have to sell to me.
Why? Because they buy the rest of the shares?
Because they bought the 90%. They bought the 90%.
Wait, once they buy the 90%, then what happens?
So what they did was they kind of did that. They were like, okay, I'm going to buy the 90%. And if you don't sell to me and that 90% sells to me, then I'm going to then buy your shares and I'm going to buy it at a super discounted price. That's called a two-tier tender offer.
What if he still refuses to sell?
The 10%? That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure what would happen then.
It's gonna be broke.
Yeah.
Fine,
I mean,
broke.
ideally, I'd rather sell at that point. If I'm that 10%, I'd rather sell than have my shares worth 10 cents from like $2, right? At that point, I'd just be broke, right? So that actually having less money in your account may be one of those incentivizing motives. I'm not entirely sure, but just know now that you're not allowed to do that second tender offer where you force them to buy the share, where you force them to sell the shares at a lower price in the case they get the 90% already. But I see where your question is. Not entirely sure, but it is a good one. Green mail. When a target company pays potential acquirers a large premium for their stock, so that, and it's kind of just that agreement, don't try and take over my company in the future. White knights, friendly rich guy that buys a large share of your company and refuses to sell it to an acquiring company. Pac-Man defense. This one is kind of weird because usually it doesn't happen, right? When we think of an acquisition, we think of a big company buying a smaller company. What do big companies usually have more of? A lot more money, right? So the Pac-Man defense assumes that smaller company then tries to acquire that bigger company. Usually that doesn't happen because you don't have that much money. At least you don't have as much money as the acquiring company. So how's that going to work out? I want to look at, when you eat like the cherries in Pac-Man, you then become like a monster, right? So that's interesting. I want to look at some more realistic examples of that, but I've asked investment bankers about it, and not all of them even really know about it. So, I mean, it happens that little, and it's that rare. But it's a cool thing to note, right? In case it has happened. And then the dual class for shares. So corporations can have multiple classes per share. For example, Class A shares provide like 1/10,000th of the value of Class B shares. Once we looked at Berkshire Hathaway, not entirely sure about that, but it might vary depending upon the bylaws of a company. Who knows? They might assign different things to their Class A and Class B. I think one just gives you more voting than the other. And because it gives you more voting power than the other at that annual shareholder meeting, then it might be a bit more expensive. So they're just different tiers, depending on, like, not everyone really wants to have voting power within a company, right? Not everyone really cares. So it just depends. Having two different types of stock with different voting rights would make it very difficult for the hostile acquirer to have, full voting power. They have to buy Class A, Class B, they have to organize that, and so on. It's a bit more difficult when you have two things to worry about than one, right? And then that's about it for today. Any other questions? All right. W, thank you guys.
Can I tell you about the tax man defense really quick?
You can